What if your entire life was controlled? What you say, what you think, even what you become. In the Soviet Union under Stalin, this was the grim reality. His mission? To reshape a society and forge a new identity for millions, no matter the cost. Welcome back to the Before Now channel. Today we're uncovering Stalin's ruthless vision to transform an entire nation. How did he pull it off? And what dark tactics were used to keep everyone in line? Stay tuned, because the truth behind Stalin's reign is more chilling than you might imagine. In his relentless pursuit to create the new Soviet man, Stalin launched a brutal social experiment aimed at reshaping every facet of Soviet life. This concept was rooted in Marxist ideology, which envisioned a new type of citizen who embodied socialist values, selfless, disciplined, and wholly devoted to the state. As bizarre as it may seem, the concept of a personality cult centered on a political leader is very unlikely in recent times. The idea that we would have artwork, busts, and even chambers dedicated to our politicians is strange. However, the Stalin cult was undoubtedly present in the Soviet Union during the 20th century. Collectivization, media control, propaganda, and other strategies further elaborated in this video were the areas Stalin carefully modeled to achieve his dark experiments. Stalin's collectivization efforts were central to his vision of creating the perfect Soviet citizen. This process, initiated in the late 1920s, aimed to consolidate individual land holdings and labor into collective farms, thereby increasing agricultural productivity and ensuring state control over food production. How cruel, right? In this era, peasants were compelled to join collective farms, which were often poorly managed and led to widespread famine. A perfect example will be further illustrated later in this video. Collectivization was framed as a necessary step towards socialism, promoting the idea that individualism was counter-revolutionary. The brutal methods employed during collectivization not only aimed at economic control, but also sought to reshape societal values, creating a populace that conformed to Stalin's ideal of loyalty and obedience. This dark experiment ultimately resulted in immense suffering, but solidified Stalin's grip on power by instilling fear and dependence on the Soviet states. During his reign, Stalin used education as a tool for transformation. In this case, the educational system underwent significant changes aimed at creating a disciplined and ideological aligned workforce. In 1931, a decree established a minimum of 4 years of compulsory schooling in rural areas and 7 years in cities. Here, the curriculum was strictly controlled, focusing on core subjects like reading, writing, and mathematics. This shift was a departure from the more progressive educational methods of the 1920s, as teachers were now expected to enforce discipline rigorously, mirroring the harsh labor conditions that students would eventually face in factories and farms. Moreover, youth organizations like the Young Pioneers and Komsomol were created to further indoctrinate children into communist ideology. As of 1940, membership in these organizations skyrocketed to nearly 14 million. From Stalin's view, this was not just about education. It was all about molding the future generation into devoted communists. Propaganda and the cult of personality was another strategy to set his agenda in motion. Let's talk about this propaganda. Stalin's regime utilized state-directed communication to promote a specific image of Soviet life and ideals. Propaganda portrayed collectivization as a means to foster a new socialist identity among the peasantry, aligning them with Stalin's vision of a unified Soviet society. The goal was to create what historians call the new Soviet person, an individual who embodied selflessness, hard work, and loyalty to the state. Stalin cultivated a persona as the father of nations, using this propaganda to depict himself as a benevolent leader guiding the Soviet people. However, this cult of personality was reinforced through various media forms, including literature, film, and art. Art became a vehicle for glorifying the achievements of the Communist Party and its leaders. Artists were expected to adhere to socialist realism, which emphasized heroic depictions of workers and soldiers. To keep this wheel in constant motion, cultural policies and social control also had to be rebranded. Stalin's ambitions extended beyond education and propaganda. He also sought to reshape culture itself. The state imposed strict censorship on literature and the arts, ensuring that all cultural outputs aligned with communist ideology. Schools reinstated history lessons that celebrated great Russian leaders, while promoting patriotism through a distorted view of history. This cultural indoctrination aimed to instill a sense of pride in Soviet achievements, while downplaying or outright ignoring any failures or dissent. But all of this at what cost? Well, after he initiated his first 5-year plan in 1928, focusing on rapid industrialization and collectivization, the ambitious goal was to transform the Soviet Union from an agrarian society into an industrial powerhouse. But within a short while, everything started going south. Massive losses were incurred, and estimates suggest that Stalin's economic policies resulted in a staggering loss of welfare, with about 24% of aggregate consumption disappearing between 1928 and 1940. The push for collectivized farming led to widespread famine, particularly in Ukraine, where millions perished during the Holodomor. Wealthy farmers, or kulaks, were persecuted, leading many to destroy their crops rather than submit to state control. While production numbers soared, the quality often lagged behind. Factories churned out goods that were subpar compared to Western standards, raising questions about whether this rapid industrialization was truly beneficial. Now, let's take a look at the human toll: citizens as pawns. Stalin's vision came with a dark price tag: human suffering on an unprecedented scale. Repression and terror were the order of the day in the USSR, as the tides turned swiftly toward the Soviet citizens. To maintain control and eliminate dissent, he employed widespread terror in the form of the Great Purge. Stay tuned to know more about this historical tragedy. Psychological manipulation tactics were used to bend the citizens to his will. A good number of citizens were coerced into conformity through propaganda and fear. Dissenters were often labeled as mentally ill, a tactic used to silence opposition by branding it as a psychological problem rather than a political one. The culture of informants was now widespread as neighbors turned against neighbors, and citizens were incentivized to tell on one another. This created an atmosphere of paranoia and distrust that permeated every aspect of life. The Great Purge, known as the Great Terror, which took place from 1936 to 1938, also left a profound scar in the heart of the Soviet citizens. During this time, Stalin sought to consolidate his power by eliminating perceived threats within the Communist Party, military, and broader society. The NKVD, or secret police, played a crucial role in his campaign, conducting mass arrests, show trials, and executions. Research estimates suggest that around 20 million people died as a result of these purges, through executions, forced labor camps known as gulags, and starvation due to harsh policies. His fear of dissent led him to target not just political rivals, but anyone who could potentially challenge his authority. This included intellectuals, military leaders, and even ordinary citizens who were accused of being enemies of the state for minor infractions. This created an atmosphere of paranoia where anyone could be accused and denounced at any moment. Daily life was marked by fear. Even trivial mistakes could lead to severe punishment. For instance, being late to work could result in arrest. Families were torn apart, with many left wondering about the fate of their loved ones who disappeared into gulags or were executed. Survivors of this tragedy often lived with the trauma of loss and uncertainty. Psychological studies have shown that this environment of terror had lasting effects on subsequent generations. Many descendants of purge victims reported heightened anxiety and fear of government authority. This series of events reveals the lengths to which totalitarian regimes will go in pursuit of ideological purity. By enforcing such strategies, he sought to forge an ideal citizenry devoted entirely to the state. However, this quest came at an unimaginable human cost, one that left tremendous pain and trauma on the Soviet society that would last for generations. As we reflect on this dark chapter of history, we must ask ourselves, what lessons can we learn about power, control, and the human spirit? Join us next time as we continue exploring history's most impactful moments. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment below. What do you think about Stalin's methods? How do they compare with modern-day governance? We want to hear your thoughts.